Hey, Kyle Christensen here with Inspiration Stuff for overcoming spinal cord injury recovery and traumatic brain injury recovery, and living life with a spinal cord injury at T12 incomplete, as well as severe traumatic brain injury on frontal and temporal lobe. That happens to be my second substantial traumatic brain injury. Had one moderate and one severe. Now my first one, I found out, happens to be a mild one that came between 10 and 11. Knowing now that any concussion they consider a mild TBI. But anyway, on with my accident stuff now. It was a sunny September day, September 12th of 2015. I set out to run to town for a can of Copenhagen dip. It was after getting tuned up for another team roping competition the next day. I'd been roping steers that week, and that Saturday evening I was going to rope the rope and sled some up at the barn, which I was doing, and work the arena with my dad. And then went for a can of chew as my parents were going to church auction with some of their friends, some family friends, and they got the call. I was T-boned and ejected, and they didn't get the details on the phone call, and this all happens to be coming back to me now. They didn't get the phone call about details. They got the phone call saying I was in an accident from a family friend who passed by and saw me in my truck and me in an accident, and they hurried up the road. It was in 5 miles of the house. It was at 391st and Hedge Lane, and they got up then. They were not prepared for what they saw. I was laying on my back in front of the dual tires. The only thing that kept me from being ran over was the Chevy Tahoe lodged in the side of the truck, as was the kind lady who reached inside and turned my truck off. The first two people on scene of my accident were two off-duty paramedics, along with that lady. And this happens to be not on a highly trafficked road at all. It's an extremely rural road, and there was a lot of, I feel like, miracles that happened that day, really honestly. And the next miracle happens to be, and then really quick, y'all, this happens to be a podcast from my YouTube. There was a lot of miracles that happened that day. There was a lot of things that, the other miracles that happened that day that I was extremely blessed in was having them call Life Flight and have Life Flight already there, getting there when my parents got there, and they landed in the field catty corner across where my truck had ended up in a guy's yard and where I had ended up in a guy's yard. Excuse me, y'all. They had Life Flight on the way. They also had me going to KU Hospital, which I'm really grateful for. I'm grateful for that. as well as they knew not to move me in certain positions and things like that because they were two off-duty paramedics. I mean, it would have been horrible if a person would have been yanking me and dragging me out from underneath the truck and completely tore my spine. They were able to get me stabilized and everything. I was unconscious and went in a coma for a few days, and they didn't know if I would. I mean, there was a lot of unknowns, They didn't know whether I was going to come back to being with the program or not. When my parents were at the hospital, I was talking but not making any sense. When I woke up out of the coma, I was talking but not making any sense. And it was a mess. That happened to be one scare. I mean, that was really scary. I don't know the name of the lady who turned my truck off, but whoever she happens to be, I'm grateful. I'm grateful to the two off-duty paramedics that found me and took care of me. My parents rushed to the hospital where my dad dropped my mom off at the door, and she went inside. And when she went inside, she went inside, and when she was inside, they brought out a chair for her, and when they brought out a wheelchair for her, she asked why she need that, and they told her because they thought she was gonna collapse from fear and worry and scare, and she was worried sick. There was a lot of stuff, and then the list of injuries kept coming. Some people showed up at the hospital, family, friends, and such. Showed up at the hospital, and they didn't know what to do either. My parents were sick, hearing all the injuries I was having. Every time they came out and told them something else, they found that I had broke or that was messed up. And they came out and told them I broke my back of vertebrae T8, T10, and T12 with an incomplete spinal tear at T12, as well as had a traumatic brain injury on my frontal and temporal lobe, as well as had a collapsed lung, road rash, severe road rash. It had to be washed out for really since from the hospital on the 3 weeks in the hospital, as well as 6 weeks at inpatient. It was getting washed out, as well as broken pelvis, broken ribs both sides, broken left arm. They found out later, after being discharged from inpatient rehab, which my inpatient rehab physical therapist and another physical therapist knew it was my ACL that was torn. But the doctors at the time kept kept saying that they thought it was fluid on the knee, and the physical therapist kept saying that they thought it was a torn ACL, and I went and got an MRI done shortly after discharge from inpatient rehab, and when met with the knee doctor, the knee surgeon, the orthopedic surgeon, he was like, "Have you been walking on that?" And because original discharge papers had me leaving in a wheelchair from inpatient, I'm grateful to my therapist there at the time, because they were not having that as an option. They pushed me to be walking out of there, and I walked out of there with a walker, and that was good. That was good. You know, the other thing that was good was that set me up for knowing how far to push my body after a traumatic accident, as well as what all the body can endure. You know, my first memories of after my accident was one night I could open my eyes and I could see my dad sitting up against the wall, and on the other side I could see a nurse, but I couldn't hold my eyes open long enough to even really get a gist of what was going on at all. The other thing was, I was making no sense talking, zero sense talking. You know, that was really hard to handle. Now, when I woke up and was a lot more aware and alert, happened to be the last day on trauma floor. I spent 1 week in ICU and 2 weeks on trauma floor, and I was alert the last day on trauma floor, and on trauma floor I kept ripping out staples out of my head and kept ripping the feeding tube out of my nose, and I had to put mittens on me to keep me from ripping things out. The mittens came off. I found a way to get the mittens off with my mouth, and then they went flying across the room. You know, don't ask me why I was ripping staples out of my scalp. I mean, that was a really, what the heck, Kyle? The feeding tube probably happens to me because I'm hardwired against gaining weight. That's something that's hardwired inside of me, a fear of gaining weight. That's probably why, you know, when I was transferred over to KU inpatient, my constant observer, who they assigned me because I was ripping things out, he was there to observe and keep an eye on me and things like that. Now, when I was transferred over to KU inpatient, he got me all nestled in the inpatient hospital bed and put a sheet over the window because I was screaming about sunlight. I mean, extreme light sensitivity after a traumatic brain injury, especially after a severe one. And that really, that's really hard to deal with. But he hung a sheet up over the window God bless his soul. And then I started in with therapy the next day. Or soon thereafter, I can't remember if it was the next day but it was soon after. I started in speech therapy, which was more working on cognitive stuff because I didn't have to learn to talk again like I had to learn to walk again. I knew how to talk. The other thing was I had occupational therapy, which that was more working on brushing my teeth without assistance, shaving without assistance, showering without assistance, and so forth. And then physical therapy was about rebuilding my body back. Now, my therapist at Inpatient had some really lofty goals for me, which I'm really grateful for. I'm really grateful. Between her and the one I was assigned after discharge from there at Rehab Institute, it really allowed me to progress to where I'm at now without having to really fight anyone on having to bump up the walking devices or anything like that. I spent 6 weeks at inpatient rehab. Started out physical therapy and parallel bars, and I couldn't even stand a complete second. Not even a complete second. That was a hopeless feeling. When I looked at the stopwatch and it was like point whatever, and are you serious? That was a disheartening feeling. I felt like I was, there's so many different feelings that have when you can't even stand in one place. You can't even stand for a complete second. That's a really disheartening feeling. And then worked more on the parallel bars, and then got to where was walking on the treadmill with a lift, taking a certain amount of weight off of my legs, and then had to have therapists moving my legs and feet. And then as well after that, started walking, leaning on a shopping cart with a lift, taking some weight off of my legs and feet. And therapists was still having to move my legs and feet. And this was all on a torn ACL, meniscus, and hamstring. Excuse me. This went on for 6 weeks. Now, the next thing that moved up to there was walking with a walker around the floor and around the recovery gym, and that was really hard at the time, as was that little staircase, like 4 or 5 steps on it, and I'd walk up those and down those, but I've got an AI thing now on Google about me, like a little biography on me, and it says raw, honesty and things like that about what goes with a spinal cord injury and traumatic brain injury. Well, let me inform you people that a spinal cord injury messes up your bowels and bladder. Alright? I couldn't do the stairs without having an accident for a long time. Anything that was causing extra strain, and that's horribly embarrassing to talk about. Especially when you're extremely grossed out by things like that, which I am and was not helping anything having accidents like that. That was really embarrassing. I was having to get lifted out of bed with a Hoyer lift and placed on a commode. I was having to get self-cathed. They come in, use the catheter to drain my bladder every 2 hours. I left there using a self-catheter on my own to avoid having to have a Foley catheter, and I learned the self-cath. Now I go to the bathroom without using a catheter, but I do sit when I go urinate, because I not want to have any accidents, because that muscle that controls bowel and bladder got crossed, and anytime strain does both, and it's like, but that was hard. I then bumped up to vehicle transfers in my mom's expedition at the time, and in and out of her expedition. I was having to have some help. And then after discharge from inpatient rehab, started at Rehab Institute, now Ability KC. And that was where I started at, and that was downtown Kansas City. That was at 31st in Baltimore. And that's down right smack dab in the heart of the city. And we live about an hour south of the city. It's about an hour 10, hour 15, something like that. There are many times that me and my mom were sitting in some rush hour traffic on the way there. But then had, and there was times at Rehab Institute, now Ability KC, where I'd leave there from therapy and have speech, occupational, and physical therapy, and then turn around and have a few doctor's appointments at KU that afternoon. That was where I saw the x-ray of my spine and saw how close I was to having a severed spinal cord altogether. It wouldn't have taken much more for me to be in a chair, which I'm extremely grateful for. So I want to throw a big thank you out to God for that one. Well, for all of his blessings, but that's another one that's at Ability KC, which was Rehab Institute back then, I started walking in a walking frame there. But had to go back to the chair to a wheelchair after knee surgery. Knee surgery was at December 23rd. I was at therapy on Christmas Eve, and being at therapy on Christmas Eve was not the most enjoyable. Uh, but they wanted to go ahead and get started on range of motion, which I was excruciating pain. Now something else that and went straight from that, and then had Christmas off, but then went straight into knee recovery stuff, and some of the knee recovery stuff was painful. And then went back to working on spinal cord injury recovery stuff and traumatic brain injury recovery stuff, which there was a lot of that was going on. There was a lot of that was going on. And I bumped up from that to, from being thrown back to a wheelchair up to the walker again, up to armpit crutches, because forearm crutches did not work for me. Forearm crutches those things were almost dangerous for me to walk with. Armpit crutches were what worked for me. And then bumped up from there to a cane and went through different levels of canes. First cane I started to walk with was more of a widespread cane, because it was a small ladder, a small step ladder that happens to be like a kitchen ladder type thing, one that's meant for like getting on top of the fridge or something like that. That's like a couple step ladder with a handle on it, and I was using that to walk, and then used the 4-prong cane, for a while, and then my therapist said I needed a single tip cane because my walking speed was quicker. Therefore, I needed to walk with something that was gonna be picking up and clearing the ground quicker. That doesn't mean I didn't fall with the cane. I mean, I still fell. I've got a video of me wiping out pretty solid up by the barn. And I fell really hard at inpatient rehab right outside the front door one morning. And I mean, I wiped out, I wiped out pretty hard. That was hard. And then the original goal for that Christmas prior to my accident was me flying my parents out to Steamboat Springs, Colorado for Christmas. No, obviously that didn't happen. I rented out of a place, and I guess I should really inform y'all. I was a private pilot and a team rep and cowboy. Now, when I was planning on flying him out there, I was gonna rent from a different rental company who has longer amount of hours you can rent, and I went to another company to rent from them to have a plane that was going to be big enough to handle their payload, strong enough to handle the baggage for a vacation at Christmas. It was a Piper Lance there. Piper Lance. That's what I was gonna fly him out to Colorado in. Rehab Institute, no, but VKC was miserable, y'all. I couldn't get through a therapy session without accidents and having to go to the bathroom to get cleaned up. That was really, really disheartening, really discouraging in a lot of ways. You know, after knee surgery, I literally had to wear a brace on my knee and lay across my mom's back seat of our Expedition because my dad wanted us in a reliable vehicle going downtown and going that often, and the Suburban she was driving at the time was older and had a bunch of miles on it, so my dad went out and got a newer Expedition, Ford Expedition, and she used to have to load me in the back of that. It took both of us to get me loaded, and my dad was already at work by the time he would have been getting about to work by the time we were getting loaded up to leave. And there was only one day that my dad was there, when my mom and I were going to Rehab Institute. That was on Christmas Eve, and he was like, "How have you guys been doing this?" And I don't know. I don't know how we're able to do that. That's one of those things that God gives you strength and helps you do things that you have no clue how you did besides God. I mean, literally straight out. I mean, there's times in my life where I've done things and I can honestly say that there's no other way I would have been able to do them besides God looking out for me in a lot of ways. My dad came up every evening at inpatient rehab, and he came up Saturday afternoons and he stayed the night with me on Saturday evenings and stayed the night and went home on Sunday afternoon. Now my mom, she stayed with me 24/7 all throughout the week, and on Sunday night, back to Rehab Institute, I did some aqua therapy there, but I was worried the whole time about having accidents in the water, which was making me really nervous. Luckily, thank God I did not have an accident in the water, and that would have been horribly embarrassing. There's other things that would have been. Hang on now. Hang on, y'all. Muting this TV. Yeah. TV got loud there for a second. It was on this morning. Back to Rehab Institute stuff. There's things that the only way that was able to do was through Christ and through God really looking out for me. You know, yeah. And then that was followed by going to Minds Matter and starting with Minds Matter. And I want to make a point to say home-based therapy is needed, home-based therapy is important, home-based therapy, that's the therapy that meets clients outside of the facility, that meets them at home or meets them at a gym or whatever. No. Minds Matter physical therapy was after I'd wake up and have breakfast with my dad around 5 a.m. and coffee until leave shortly before 8 to go a short drive over to the gym where I would start each morning with ankle rotations, and that was followed by going out to the track, and then that was to do some forward and backwards walking along with sideways walking along with bleacher stairs. There were some very hard times, and that was followed by going back inside and working on wall leans, standing marches, sideways walking with resistance band around my ankles. That was followed by knee lifts. That was followed by going to the Smith machine after that. For squats, lunges, balance board, and Bosu ball balancing, as well as step-ups. Then all of that was followed by floor work, crunches, followed by ball transfers, followed by push-ups, planks, sideways, forward, some Superman position thing, and glute bridges that would get up and do crunch machine, and followed by Roman crunches, and then leave. Later on in Minds Matter, I switched therapists because therapist had at the time, for the most amount of time, was at Minds Matter, left for another job. Now, the therapist I started having after him was really into working out, things like that. So it was basically getting strong as possible, things like that. I was walking distance. I could walk 3 miles, had time to walk 3 miles in a physical therapy session. Therefore, I would walk 6 miles total, because a lot of times I would walk a few miles before I got there, and then a few miles after in therapy with him. Or I'd walk 2 miles prior and walk 2 miles in therapy with him, and walk a total of 5 miles. Or, there were other days that walked only 3 miles, or there were other days that walked 1 mile. The 1 mile did as for time. The other did for endurance. Now, I went and bought a 20 and 40 pound weighted jackets. Have a 20 pound weighted vest and a 40 pound weighted vest up at the home gym in the barn, which I'm going to work out today in with a friend. I eventually got my mile time with a 20 pound weighted jacket on to what it was unweighted, and I felt really solid about that. Being able to do that after a spinal cord injury. and traumatic brain injury that was severe. You know, it's really hard for people to say what caused what. I mean, they both overlap a lot with some things. No, that's what a lot of doctors kept telling my parents. You know, it's really hard to have a spinal cord injury, and it's really hard to have a traumatic brain injury. And it's really hard, especially when they have both, because it's like what caused what, you know? It's really like what caused what. You know, I also had acupuncture for a couple years. That was the only thing I did after my accident that I can say did not pay off. That was to bring back my drop foot, but really, I mean, knee stem wasn't working on my drop foot. That's electrodes that hook up and supposed to make your muscles fire. No acupuncture, that was needles going in my legs and scalp, hooked up to electrodes. Yeah, nice, right? No. That was extremely uncomfortable. Needles in my scalp. I about had a conniption fit the first time he put them in my scalp. And then he was putting them in my legs, and I was having atrophy so bad in my legs. He was bending needles, putting them in, and that didn't feel good. That, you know, even having a spinal cord injury and not having full feeling from below injury to my feet, I can still feel things. And let me tell you what, that freaking hurt. I mean, that hurt. Straight out, this, anyway you slice that cake, that freaking hurt. That was painful. And my acupuncturist, he was originally from China. But yeah, that was painful. That was the only thing that did not pay off. No. My career goal was still, and that was to bring back my drop foot on my right ankle and to be able to dorsiflex, plantar flex, and go like that with my ankle, which I can't do on my right side. I've got total paralysis on my right ankle. There's no movement at all. You know, my career goal was still flying commercially, which was a really realistic goal prior to my accident, and was even for a while after my accident until I started to have mental battles. And I started to have mental battles with depression, anxiety, delusions, as well as my traumatic brain injury, mock and bipolar. Straight out, my traumatic brain injury is mock bipolar a lot of times. And I was unmedicated for bipolar for a long time. Now I'm on Depakote for bipolar. I'm also on lorazepam, which happens to be Ativan, and on Seroquel for anti-anxiety, and on Effexor for an antidepressant. You know, that was hard to accept. Wasn't going to be flying as a career goal. You know, I fell into having that almost as a pipe dream for a long time. I mean, it was really not anything more than a pipe dream. I mean, I was basically blasting hot air, thinking I was gonna fly again after a certain amount of time. you know, and at Minds Matter, the therapist I started with, I could not have asked for a better therapist, especially when I used to have to interrupt therapy a lot of times because my anxiety, which I was not medicated for at the time, which would have been really handy to have been, I wasn't medicated for at the time, and it was causing panic attacks like all through therapy sessions. And I mean, I'll be straight out honest, I used to be obese, and then I dropped a bunch of weight, and then wasn't obese anymore, and then I got like really, 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 really thin, and was 145 to 155 pounds lighter than my heaviest weight. I was taking 34 jeans off without even unbuttoning, and I'm 6 foot tall and wear a 14 shoe. I wear a 12 boot. But a 14 shoe. There's that. Therefore, when I was, between 150 and 175 for a long time. That was, but I kept thinking that people were trying to make things always the case. Like, if that was part of the delusions I was facing, it was like if I thought people are trying to make it sound like, well, if you were once this way, then you always need to be this way. Well, for one, any lunatic knows that that's not, only a lunatic would think that way. And that's not true. No one thinks that way, but it was going through my mind after traumatic brain injury because, trust me, the unwanted thoughts and unwanted feelings are quite surreal after a traumatic brain injury. Not to mention having several traumatic brain injuries. And then, there's so much I was struggling with, and I kept having to interrupt therapy to be calling my mom over to talk to my mom about things. And, my accident happened. Within 2 weeks, it turned 24. And I'll be 35 tomorrow. And this will be 11 years, this September 12th. That was a hard thing. I will say I don't have accidents anymore. And I don't do a bowel program like what most spinal cord injury people do. I found by eating healthy and spacing out meals, it works out good. And that came from a lot of trial and error. But I found that works out good. I found that works out and that has a positive benefit. And I don't mean to gross anyone out. That's not my intent. But This happens to be about inspiration, and happens to be about motivation, and happens to be about helping people. This happens to be about helping people who have spinal cord injuries and traumatic brain injuries. And I mean, I'm not going to be helping anyone if I make everything all rainbows and unicorns, because anyone who's had a traumatic brain injury or a spinal cord injury knows that there's not any part of either one of those injuries that are unicorns and rainbows. They're a lucky leprechaun with a no. I mean, no. I mean, there's a lot of hard stuff that goes with them, and these are all things that prior to Ibogaine, I wouldn't have been able to talk about in a way that would be healthy. It's like Ibogaine really gave me so much mental clarity. And for those of you that don't know what Ibogaine happens to be, Ibogaine's psychedelic. It's not legal in the States. They're working on making it legal in the United States. I went to Ambia Life Sciences, small potatoes to those people, but they did wonders for my life. Ibogaine's a psychedelic medicine that comes from the iboga shrub in Africa. Comes off the root of, I believe, off the root of an iboga shrub in Africa, and it's used in African culture for medicinal purposes as well as ceremonial purposes. And it's not like taking a trip without leaving the farm. It's not enjoyable. It's intense, it's scary, and it's not used for recreational use like other LSDs. This happens to be really medicinal psychedelic. It's legal in Canada, and it's legal in Mexico, and it's legal in other parts of the world. But there's been numerous case studies that have done wonders. Stanford University is doing a lot of research on it, as well as there's some states now that are running some trials on it. I'm a firm believer in it. I believe it can help people with TBIs. What it did for me was wonders. It's not like you do the Ibogaine and you throw your hands up and you go, oh well, I did Ibogaine, well then everything's gonna be hunky dory. No, it's not like that. That's part of the process to the road to recovery. The rest happens to be up to the individual to capitalize on the Ibogaine medicine, because that's the start of your Ibogaine journey. And the Ibogaine journey really begins there, and really happens to it's good to follow up with counseling after that, as well as cognitive behavioral therapy after that. I did have to come off all alcohol and all medicine, prescription medicine, before getting it for a few weeks prior. Now, you could still smoke weed and right up until until midnight the morning of being picked up being picked up by Ambia Life to go across the border and to go to the Sweat Lodge and to go through that, because you don't get Ibogaine the first day when you go over the border and Tijuana. However, and I don't smoke weed anymore. I did back then. Sometimes, when I was out in San Diego, that was where me and my mom and two of her friends, their family friends, but more of my mom's friends, flew into and stayed. And they stayed with my mom in San Diego while I went across the border into Tijuana. And I was an angry, delusional cheech out there. Anyway, and, I found that after I began, it's like I don't crave alcohol, which I originally quit drinking without anything like that, but relapsed after the loss of my dad, who passed away September 17th. You all are probably getting a general consensus of how horrible of a month September leaves in my mind. But I found that marijuana made me paranoid. It was giving me unwanted thoughts. And if I wasn't having any unwanted thoughts and I smoked, then the unwanted thoughts would appear. And we're not supposed to stay numb to pain, y'all. And what I mean by that happens to be there's healthy ways of numbing pain or feeling good without drugs or alcohol, or without mass amounts of prescriptions. It's like, because I was addicted to Adderall years back. I quit that addiction to be able to follow through and knock out my private pilot's license. I got on that for a little while in college. When I was at Fort Scott, that's the one I graduated from. I was at K-State for a while, but I basically wrote the book on everything not to do it at D1 University. But Adderall it originally started, starting out, it was doing what it was supposed to do, helping me concentrate, things like that. Alright. But when I came off of the horse that one night and smacked my head in the arena ground and got a traumatic brain injury that they found out after my accident, had a traumatic brain injury prior, and that was the time that I can recall that hitting my head on the ground really hard. They say don't take, it depends on who you listen to, because some people are about, prescribing Adderall to people with traumatic brain injuries, and there's doctors who are horribly against prescribing Adderall to anyone who's had traumatic brain injury. And I fully support the ones who are anti-Adderall after a traumatic brain injury, because it started to have a drastically different effect on me after a traumatic brain injury. And it was not a pretty sight, y'all. It was not. It was a all-out shit show. It was. I don't mean to cuss, and that was the only way I could, I quit cussing when I went back to God. And it's like, and the whole time I was still praying, but I was, for so long, it was, looking back, I mean, I almost am sick of the way that I used to pray, because it used to be, I'd pray, but it would be always asking for something when I'd pray to God. Now I pray at times to say thank you. I mean, to say thank you, like, thank you, God. Thank you for your blessings. Thank you for, all your undeserved blessings. He's looked out for me for, since I was born, because I wasn't supposed to be born, really. There's complications at my childbirth. My dad almost lost me and my mom at childbirth. God's been extremely good to me over the years. And I feel like anytime we're praying to God and all we're doing is asking, we're acting like entitled, pompous assholes. I feel like we're supposed to pray to God and to thank Him, and generally from the bottom of our hearts mean thank you. It's like not supposed to pray and only be like, need this, need that, please protect me, please. It's so alright to say, please protect me. It's so alright to ask God for stuff, but it's like, you need to also be saying gratitude prayers as well, because, really, it's like, but I also did personal training for some years after my accident, and that was shortly after my accident. For the first, it's about the first 2 years after my accident, I did personal training, 2016 and 17, and that really helped strengthen my body back from the muscle that lost, because I lost all muscle. I wasn't even able to lift, like, it was embarrassing. It was, I was extremely weak after a spinal cord injury, and strength drops quick after a spinal cord injury. I went up to the barn, and I've got a home gym and a horse stall up at the barn, and I went up there and worked out over the weekend, and oh my goodness, y'all. Strength drops quick after a spinal cord injury. And what's so weird happens to be I'm strongest off the back, and that's my strongest muscles are my back muscles. And it's odd that they are, especially after having a spinal cord injury and a broken back in 3 spots, but that's really where my strength happens to be the most strong off of. Ibogaine was really opened the door back into faith. Ibogaine was really opening the door back to God, back to faith, back to religion. But then, as far as chronic pain, I live with chronic pain, when had a sore had another ulcer on my behind. I was prescribed pain medication, but I stopped getting them refilled because I was prescribed hydrocodone for that. But I stopped getting them refilled because I don't like the way they make me feel. I don't like the way they make me feel. I don't even take the prescribed dose of gabapentin for nerve-ending pain because I don't like the way it makes my mind feel. It makes me scatter-minded and not to have collected thoughts. And I'll be sitting here searching for words, and it's like, no. I'd rather deal with physical discomfort and have to move around a little bit and shift positions to get out of pain than sound like an airhead. But, my body's literally been tattered and torn. I've had some pressure ulcers on my feet, as well as on my rear end. What else? I'm gonna cover this podcast. And y'all, my podcasts happen to be on the most podcasts I do happen to be on Spotify. I'm starting to do them on YouTube now. This happens to be one I'm starting to do on YouTube now. Most of my podcasts are on Spotify, and it's TBI Awareness and Struggles with Kyle Christensen. CHRISTIANSEN. But don't let the negative thoughts get to you. Everyone has negative thoughts. Cognitive behavioral therapy really helped me because it really taught me to be mindful. And, when I first heard mindful, I was, here's quacky stuff going on now. But it's not. And when I first heard mindful, I was like, all right, what does that mean? All right, exactly, because how am I supposed to shut off all these racing thoughts? And it's not about shutting off all the racing thoughts. It's about, it's like you're on a subway train and you're walking from the front car, or you're walking from the back car to the front car of the subway train, and they're all your thoughts that you're going through. And then you step off the subway train, which means you take a step back out of your thoughts. You let them pass. You don't judge them. You don't judge yourself on having the certain thoughts, and you observe and see what they are, things like that. The automatic negative thoughts. The automatic negative thoughts, y'all. Those can be really hard to live with. They really can be. The automatic negative thoughts, for each negative thought that you have, you need to be replacing it with, sometimes 4 or 5 positive thoughts that counter that negative thought. Because You know, the sometimes our mind wants to dwell on the negative and not the positive. And that's where counseling and cognitive behavioral therapy really helped me, was recognizing unwanted thoughts and negative thoughts. My back cut right there, y'all. That was what that face was for. Took a deep breath and it was, come on, wake up, Kyle. Wake up. Now I'm alert now. Sometimes it does that. I laid on the bench the other day up at the barn on one of the workout benches. Excuse me. I've got up at the barn. I've got a boxing bag stand with a boxing bag. Flat barbell bench that allows for incline as well as the bench that moves the incline, flat or decline for using dumbbells. I got a bunch of dumbbells, the hex head rubber ones. I got a dip station, Roman crunch frame, battle ropes. I've also got an ease bar for curls. I've got some curl stuff. I've got an agility ladder with hurdles to really be making an effort at bending knee, lifting up, kicking out, and placing my foot down on the ground. Being more mindful of foot placement. You know, there's what else? I got some other stuff, but you know, anyway, that's what I've got for y'all on this podcast. Alright, take care. God bless. Glory to God.